if you don't have disturbance. And so anyway, all this stuff fits into how I came to appreciate fire as a disturbance agent and how important it is to maintain so that all the organisms that occur at the different stages of succession.
Hello, I'm Lane Hartzell with the Korea IT Times, and I'm here with Dick Hutto, Emeritus Professor of Biology and Wildlife Biology at University of Montana. He taught there from 1977 to 2014. Throughout his career, he and his students conducted research on various aspects of avian ecology, birds, and the primary focus was on conifer forests, such as out in the West, that are restored by severe wildfires. Upon recognizing that a lot of people, most people actually are unaware of the naturalness of the necessity of severe fires, Dick shifted his attention towards delivering research results that could be communicated to the public, not so much in the academic publications, which he's done. He's communicated these findings through radio, television, newspapers, magazines, books, you name it, web-based platforms, working to bridge the gap between scientific understanding and public perception of fire ecology. He's the author of A Beautifully Burned Forest. Dick, welcome to Techniques and Civilization.
Well, thanks for the invitation to talk, Lane.
I want to first of all start out with your background for, say, a lot of young people that are listening in and are interested in biology and forests. How did you get started?
Yeah, my background is I grew up in suburb of LA, Los Angeles, and right at the base of the San Gabriel Mountains, which were covered with chaparral. And so there were fires in the chaparral periodically. I can even remember sitting out in the street in lawn chairs watching at night, all the flare-ups and things, and it was just part of life, right, to have fire there. But that isn't what really got me into what I eventually started studying. That basically took getting into college, where I took a biology class. We went out into the field and began to study some of the chaparral systems, and got me more interested in just realizing. It got me realizing I could major in biology or something that got me outside and spend my time outside. So that's how I basically got into being out in the field. I wanted to do something in the field, so I ended up working on, kangaroo rats in the desert for my master's, migratory wood warblers for my PhD that went to Mexico in winter and came back to the States in summer. But it wasn't until I got a job at the University of Montana here in the late 70s that I got into fire. What happened was a fire burned near town before I arrived. And the next spring or something, I went up into the burn just poking around and began to see that there were some interesting things in that burn forest that I hadn't experienced before. And it was so interesting that it just stayed in the back of my mind, basically, that, wow, this is weird. I have never seen things like blackback woodpeckers and fire morel mushrooms and these weirdo little beetles with long horns flying in, while you're standing there. And so it was in my mind, but I had other things to do. I was still working on migratory warblers in Mexico and things like that. But then the fires of 1988 in Yellowstone came along.
Okay, right.
And that provided more incentive, because it wasn't just the fires that are in Yellowstone, which were huge. It was like 1.5 million acres, but there were like 45 or 50 different fires just in Western Montana. So I realized, wow, this is a gold mine of an opportunity to have independent, fires where I could visit a lot of them and get sort of real replication of what goes on in a burned forest, after it's, quote, destroyed. And that's what the news, the media basically would say things like, oh, our forests are under siege, that kind of thing. Things are being destroyed. So that got me out in the field, and that's where the whole thing started. I then gathered data that showed a lot of the birds. I focus on birds. A lot of the birds I found in these burn forests simply were rare or completely absent elsewhere. And so then it begins to make you ask, well, what? How's that even possible? How could you occur only in a severely burned forest, right? And only during the first 1 to 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? Then where are you? It's like, where would you go? Well, the only other place you'd go to another burn. If burns are so common, and they've always been common, and we're talking now, if you start thinking about it, going back in evolutionary time, if there's always a fire within 100 miles or something every single year, it's not that big a deal to stay in that particular habitat type and slowly become adapted to be restricted, in a sense, to that particular condition. Evolve things like coloration that make you match the background that you're in. I mean, nobody doubts that a white-tailed ptarmigan or a polar bear evolved a white plumage or a white fur, right, to become cryptic against their background. Well, the same story goes for something like a black-backed woodpecker. It's sitting in its environment it's been with for hundreds or thousands of years. And so all this began to tell me how special these severely burned forests were. And then teaching ecology, I also realized a big segment of our ecology lectures involved disturbance ecology. It's in every textbook, right? You learn about, oh, gee, here's a vegetation type. It gets disturbed severely somehow. Individuals die, individual plants, lots of plants die. And then you start what's called succession, where you get an early stage of vegetation growth that's very different from what was there before. And then in 10 years, it's something different again. It's sort of a shrubland. Then in 10 or 20 years, it's different again. It's small trees. Then in another 50 or 100 years, oh, wow, it's back to larger trees again. That succession is a natural process, right? And the more you think about it, it's not only natural, but it's necessary for the things that occur, especially in those early stages. Where else are they going to be if you don't have disturbance? And so anyway, all this stuff fits into how I came to appreciate fire as a disturbance agent and how important it is to maintain so that all the organisms that occur at the different stages of succession are maintained on the landscape. And we're required, by law, the National Forest Management Act and others, to maintain the system that sustains us all. And so that's why
your assertion or your hypothesis at that time, this was decades ago, was that you were observing an entire ecosystem that comes in, or the organisms are coming in. This is adapted to this kind of burn system, right?
Right.
And that's what you're observing. Okay.
Yeah. And there are others that just use burn forests opportunistically too, but that's not as interesting. I mean, elk come in and white-tailed deer come in and robins come in, but they're elsewhere. They could do just fine without a burn forest. Right. But that's not where the story is. The story is those critters that seem to be totally restricted. And nothing's totally restricted to anything, but you can be relatively restricted where you're hard pressed to find them anywhere else. And things like black-backed woodpecker, I always say, well, if you show me one outside a burn forest, I'll give you $10,000. If you give me $10,000 for every one I show you in a burn forest, and I'm going to walk away a rich man.
Okay, so this is the star of the story, right?
Yeah, it's the star of the story, the one that sort of was delivering the message. So I think of myself as the messenger, So don't blame me for these ideas. I'm just telling you what the birds are telling me. This is an important environmental condition that we have to learn to, that the subtitle of the book is we have to learn to celebrate severely burned forest conditions. And it's hard for us to do because as humans, we tend to think of fire, negatively. It's a destructive force. But if you begin to think of it more like the sun, which can destroy us too if we don't wear sun off, but it's an essential part of a natural system. And we have to begin to learn to embrace it and be safe in the face of it. which we can do relatively easily, it turns out, if we've spent more time thinking about our houses and what's immediately around houses, we can apparently reduce the threat of fire tremendously.
Got it. Okay, so a lot of people, or most people, probably view severe wildfires as ecological disasters. I have a note here. Okay, let's talk about the Palisades. You grew up in LA. The Palisades and the cities there are built within what they call a fire region, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned the chaparral and the
Mm-hmm.
kind of brush. Um, if we build cities in fire regions such as that, then can you walk through what can we expect from that? And then what about the forest health, as this fire comes through, the beetles and so forth and so on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple elements there. One is to distinguish chaparral from forests, which I'll get to in a second, and then the other is, what are we doing building right in the middle of these places that are fire prone? That's a problem. I mean, but what we can do at least is take advice of people that know what they're talking about when it comes to probability of a house burning. We can do things about the house itself to harden the house in the immediate surrounding and reduce tremendously the chance that the house will burn. Now, the Palisades fire was an exceptional situation. Just like Fort McMurray up in Canada, the whole town where half the town burned down. There's a book called Fire Weather by John
Yes,
Valiant. Just
yes, yes.
fantastic book, but scary as heck. The fires these days are very different than what they used to be. And when you couple 60 to 100-mile-an-hour winds with fire and embers blowing and things, there's not a lot you can do, basically, except be there with your garden hose and hope to put out the embers. But we kick everybody out when the fire is burning. So it's this double-edged sword. It's tough to know how to be safe. So anyway, the chaparral is also a very, very fire-dependent community. It's sort of a shrubland. The fires used to burn on average every 30 or more years. Now with human-caused fire, it's too frequent. So, and grasses are beginning to come in and replace some of the chaparral. So there's a problem of too frequent fire now because of human-caused fire. But the whole chaparral system is a separate story. So the story I'm particularly interested in are forests, mixed conifer forests. That would be forests that have a mixture of conifer trees like ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, western larch, lodgepole pine, those sorts of things. When you get mixed conifer forests, that's where the story I'm concerned with really happens. That's where the magic occurs. It's about, of the conifer forest lands in the western United States, it covers about 85% of that forest land. So it's not trivial, but it is a small subset of the kind of vegetation types in the world, that I'm talking about. I'm talking about a very special mixed conifer system. So,
can I ask
yeah, so what we can do is to try to be safe and live in these conditions.
Let me ask you just a quick question. So an alpine forest is a conifer forest?
Well, if you get way up in the alpine, you have hardly any trees at all.
Right.
But yeah, and it's the lower elevation below that. When you get up pretty high, it's spruce fir and things like that.
Okay.
So you come down in elevation a little. Now you get the interesting mixture of all these species together,
and then you go. Mountains. This is, and the ponderosa actually smells like butterscotch.
Yeah.
Okay.
It smells like vanilla.
Or vanilla. Yeah.
Yeah. You walk up to the bark and wow. Yeah. So then if you go farther into the Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, then it can become fairly pure ponderosa. It's not really the mixed conifer forest I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And there, the story is that these forests have been, we've suppressed fire for so long. Now the understory is coming up with trees that weren't all that common before, and it serves as fuel. And now the forests are burning up, and they never used to. And anyway, that's not the story I'm talking about. I'm talking about mixed conifer forests where severe fire has always played a significant role.
Got it.
Always. And it always leaves a mixed severity result, even though it's a high severity fire. High severity fire doesn't mean 100% of it's high severity. Mm-hmm. The most you ever get is 30 or 40% high severity, and then 30 or 40% mixed severity, and 30 or 40% low severity.
You call it a mosaic type pattern?
Yeah, it's a mosaic, right? But you do have to have the high severity component where all the trees die basically, and it's just a charcoal forest. That's where the magic really happens in those systems. And unfortunately, there's things we're doing in terms of our public land management that aren't really in the interest of maintaining that system. That's where I end up in this book, kind of addressing that issue of what do we do about this if we care to maintain the system.
Yeah, as we go into talk about public policy, let me quote from just a few days ago, a reporter discussing this with President Trump. So the reporter says, and I want to ask you to respond to this. The reporter says, could your recent conflict with Governor Newsom impact wildfire relief, sorry. And President Trump said, sure, maybe it could, but Newsom shouldn't have fires like that. This is President Trump, you clean the floor of your forest and you won't have any forest fires. Can you respond to this?
Sure.
Is it incoherent? I mean, first of all.
Yeah, a bit. There's two components. One, he shouldn't have fires. Newsom shouldn't have. Well, Trump apparently doesn't have the slightest understanding of natural, ecology. Fire is an absolutely natural, necessary process in this particular system. Okay, so that's the first thing he has dead wrong. The second thing is if we rake the forest and clean it up underneath, we wouldn't have any of these fires. Well, it's silly to want not to have fire because it's a natural process, A. B, cleaning up the forest floor does not stop fire. It definitely reduces the chance of a severe fire under normal conditions and normal years, right? And so that's why we're doing a lot of thinning and prescribed burning in the West right now, because we think it's helping reduce fire severity should a fire come along. Mm-hmm. The problem with that, and I don't doubt that 99% of the time it will reduce fire severity, but it's not 99% of the fires we worry about. It's the 1% or 2%. Those are the ones that burn 98% of the land. And those thinning doesn't do anything. It's embers and things that blow. And the research from the fire lab here in Missoula, Montana shows that it's embers that are what we need to be worrying about. It's not fuels out there a mile away or 2 miles or 5 miles or, they're thinning forests, 10 miles out of any sort of community. That's doing nothing to reduce the severity of or threat of fire in a community. So, yeah, so Donald Trump, I think, has it wrong.
Okay.
But it'd be fun to argue with him, I guess.
When he mentioned clean the floor of the forest, and I thought, gosh, I'm going to talk to Dick this week, so I'm going to ask you about this quote. It just seemed really off to me.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, what's surprising to me is how common that sentiment is.
Well, yeah, it's common.
Even in the forest community, it's like, wow, they're really convinced, that they need to save the forest from itself.
Right.
It's like there was a sign in talk about marketing and messaging and things. There was a sign here in Missoula some years ago that had a picture of all blackened lodgepole pine and other trees in a mixed conifer forest. Mm-hmm. And across this is a big sign on a street here in town by the Forest Service. And it said, unfortunately, they can't run for their lives with respect to the trees that were all black and dead. Right. And I was looking at the sign going, what? Unfortunately, they can't run for their lives. Fortunately, they just got reproductive success.
Right.
Well, that fire is the very thing that stimulates the seed, production. The cones open and release seeds, and the success and the next generation of forest is then allowed to occur. Anyway, so the ecology is what's missing here. The ecological understanding, whether it's Donald Trump or the public at large, or even many foresters, just don't. They seem to be very concerned about tree growing, which we're really good at. But this isn't private forest lands. We're talking about our public lands, and that shouldn't be what we basically are using our public lands for.
Can you make a distinction for us between a national park and a national forest? There's a distinction, right? Here.
Yeah, the national park is more of a hands-off right? So we're not doing active management. The National Forest System, which is broader, more acreage, we're allowed to do a variety of things. It's called, the multiple use, basically. Sure, we'll allow a little cutting, we'll allow a little mining, we'll allow ATVs, we'll allow you to run your dog through there and do this and that and the rest. And so it's more lenient in terms of what we allow ourselves to do. But they're both, saved basically in the interest of public welfare.
Right, right. Let me ask about your encounters with the public. So you've given a lot of talks, you've been communicating with people on public policy. I call this actually open reasoning, because when you're using social media and then also you're physically speaking, there's this kind of open reasoning that I think is important to happen in any society, especially democratic, obviously. What are the biggest obstacles that you've encountered? And then what are some successes?
The obstacles, I'm not sure what I would call an obstacle. I've given a lot of talks and things like that, but most of the modes of communication, I don't feel like it goes anywhere, kind of lands on deaf ears. I mean, I've published a lot of things. It doesn't seem to do anything. The only thing where I found success seems to be going in the field with people. And then it's like magic. If I can walk with you for 20 minutes in a severely burned forest, I can see your mind operating and your perception change 180 degrees from where it was when we walked out into that forest. All of a sudden you begin to go, aha, I get it. And so that's where the success has been, which gets me realizing how important environmental education is and that kind of thing, and getting yourself in the field. It's very hard to sit and talk about this stuff like us here. I can't kind of give you a good feel of what's going on and how magical and special these severely burned forests are. More special in my mind than old growth forests that we just sort of revere. Oh, old growth. Well, what about the severely burned forest? It's more special to me than an old.
They're beautiful, as you say.
Yeah. So you got to go there. You got to be there. You have to go out into the woods, I think, to appreciate the value of any system. Whether it's the flowers now that are out in the Atacama Desert, or whether it's the glaciers in Glacier Park or whatever. You have to actually see these things and feel it to appreciate it. And that's tough when we're, as humans, we're all congregated into urban centers and have little firsthand touch.
I had mentioned to you that I had a couple of degrees in biology, and but I didn't tell you, one of my professors, George Simmons, was taught freshwater ecology. I'll never forget this. I was about 19 years old, but we would go out, and on Saturday morning, we'd go out and get in a boat and paddle out on the pond. And then he would be pointing out, we were taking taking samples of the mud and this kind of, but he was also pointing out what was going on. It's one of the best memories I have from undergrad. And I wanted to tell people that are watching that you have a fire ecology stories that people can look at on YouTube and walk with you through the forest, where you point out the black-back
woodpecker,
and the blue, the really
mountain bluebird. Yeah. No, that's a good short clip. It's only 9 minutes or something like that, and we really lucked out. It was a PBS public television series I did for a couple of years. And that was just one of the little segment we did. And we knew this big fire burned the year before or whatever. It was just chance. We just went up this road, and you can look at the video yourself. It's just phenomenal, the stuff we saw there in the morning out shooting, some video. It was amazing.
Well, you're here in a forest that's been burned, and then you've got your binoculars, and you just start picking out birds and beetles, and
Yeah, it's like that. It's exactly like that. None of that was staged. We're just walking up the road. Let's just walk up this road, and I just see something and start talking about it. And it was really good. So I was lucky, and I think it is a good representative picture of what you can get walking through one of these forests, and begins to tell you something about the value of these places and what we need to think about. How are we really maintaining them or not?
Let me take this role, and you respond. Why don't we want to cut down that forest that you were taking people through?
Yeah, and it's a common thing.
Yeah.
It's one activity that where we basically waive most of the environmental regulations that would otherwise prevent us. So it's called salvage logging.
Okay.
So even look at the word salvage. It implies there's no value in that place except what we might be able to get if we harvested the timber. Well, that doesn't acknowledge that there's some value other than the wood that's sitting there in the forest. So yeah, we rush out in there and salvage log. And as you can expect, any of these special critters that come in, whether it's a beetle, there's a beetle that can detect heat for up to 50 miles away with an infrared detector on its thorax.
Unbelievable.
There's the blackback woodpecker. There's these mushrooms. There's all kinds of weirdo flowers and things. And so none of these are going to be in there if you start going in with machinery and cutting everything out. And so I think we shouldn't be salvage logging at all. It's also the most sensitive phase of forest restoration, where the new forest is going to begin to grow. And what we do in there influences how that successional pathway is going to occur. And so we shouldn't be in there at all. People might say, well, wait, we lost the timber base, some of the timber base. We need to make up for that. And my response would be, well, then go cut some green trees. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of green trees to cut. Look around you. It's infinite, the amount of green tree. And we can do it in a way that's sustainable. And by that, I mean in moderation. We don't need industrial forestry in our public lands. But there's plenty of green trees to get. Leave the burn forest alone. That's magic. And it's going to be the next forest to come.
I'm going to include one of your slides of that succession forest where you have the burn forest all the way up. I'll put that at the beginning of the discussion. I have one more question for you about the avian ecology. When I was watching the woodpecker there, it will make a certain kind of sound, and it'll start out slow and then speed up. And you said in the video that this is a kind of territorial thing that they do. How does this work with these?
Yeah. So all birds will produce a song or some noise, basically to advertise their presence, either to let other males know that I'm here, it's a territory. If you come in here, I'm going to chase you out and I kick your little butt, or to attract females, or both. And so woodpeckers basically are not songsters, but they make noise by pounding with their bill against the tree trunk. Thunk, 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 thunk.
Yeah.
And they have, there's all kinds of weird adaptations to buffer the brain, from getting bashed.
I wondered about that also. Yeah.
But what's interesting is they're just as distinctive in their tapping pattern as a songbird is in the song that it sings. So a chickadee, a black-capped chickadee goes, and a crow goes, and right. And so woodpecker, same thing. If it's going bum 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 bum, it's a pileated woodpecker. If it's going, you can't quite count the number of taps, it's a hairy woodpecker. Anyway, so people that are pretty good at songs and sounds can distinguish these critters. So that's what it was doing, advertising the territory, and others stay away.
When they're also tapping like that, do they also eat the beetles inside the bark, or?
That's a separate. So that one is just communication, and when they're digging for beetles, it's really just sounds like a carpenter. Bang, 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 bang. I see. Flake, and you see bark flying away, and then they dig.
When you're walking through the forest, you could hear this, and you would say, okay, that's such and such,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I was attracted to using birds as an ecological tool. Mm-hmm. There's no other organism, vertebrate, on the planet that is as conspicuous or visibly conspicuous or orally conspicuous as a bird. So I can go outside, stand in one place, and within a football field around me, give you a list 95% accurate of what birds are there. You can't do that for any other kind of organism. You're going to need traps. You're going to need the equipment. You're going to need this. You're going to need that. You're going to need to ID it with them. Not birds. I can just stand there and then get the heck out and go do another sample. Right. So I can generate a lot of independent samples of what birds are around more easily than with any other kind of organism. That's why they're so great as environmental indicators.
When you talk about the birds, you also talked about, I think, the beetles, they have that infrared sensor. It just kind of dawned on me, and of course I live in a forest too, near the mountains. This kind of sensory system, I don't even want to call it system, this sensory experience that you can get from being around this is just extraordinary. And I can tell that you really love your
Yeah,
work.
extraordinary. Yeah, that's half of what I wake up for every day. So we walk the dogs in the morning, right? After we talk, that's what I'll do. And it's just I can't wait to hear what's going on. Right now, there seem to be a bunch of ravens that are just hanging on up the canyon and making all these weirdo gurgling noises. And all the kids are out apparently, and they're running around in groups. It's so fun, just to sit and listen as we walk and what's going on around us. And you learn so much because these sounds and these critters are tightly tied to particular environmental conditions. If you don't have those conditions, you don't have those particular species. And this is why they're such great indicators. If you graze too heavily, the species that need the good shrubs underneath are gone. You don't hear them anymore. If you cut all the trees and salvage log, all the things you would have heard there aren't there anymore. And so you can get these interesting signals from the birds that are talking to you if you're just patient enough to listen. And again, I feel like I'm the translator. I'm just the messenger. They're the ones telling me this story.
Thank you so much for your time. I've been speaking with Richard Hutto, who's the Emeritus Professor of Biology and Wildlife Biology, University of Montana. Thank you
Hey,
so
thanks,
much.
Lane. That was
Okay.
fun.